Okay, well, let's continue our excursion into the Benko gambit and the consideration of black's ideal, easy, natural development by looking at a game from the 2001 World Open, and it's between an American amateur player called Wright and Grandmaster John Fedorowicz, who, by the way, also wrote a very, very good book on the Benko gambit a few years ago. If you can get your hands on a copy, it's well worth doing so. John Fedorowicz, Benko gambit, probably one of the best books ever written on the subject. And once again, it's very instructive to see these authors in action using their own favourite opening. And this is a game of thematic rather than theoretical interest, I would say. A textbook example of the Benko gambit triumphing when White progressively softens up his own position without actually realising what he's doing, more or less. Okay, well, the opening move should be very, very familiar to us now. Here comes the familiar flanking blow against White's centre b5. And once again, as we're considering in this section the Benko gambit accepted, we see White taking the second pawn. And for the first time on this DVD, we see the favoured move order these days, g6, rather than the capture on a6 straight away. And after that, White played knight c3. Now, having avoided some of White's trickier variations involving a double fianchetto, White fianchettoing both bishops, Black now takes on a6. Knight f3, d6, and again we see the variation where White gives up his castling rights in order to establish a presence in the centre. Well, we've mentioned before on the DVD that if Black gets the opportunity to deny White castling rights, he should do so. White takes with the king. And now we see the traditional manoeuvre of the king to g2. Knight bd7, and now rook coming across to e1. And now Black has many moves in this position. I mentioned queen a5 as an ideal earlier. Fedorowicz plays queen a5 in this game, but firstly he puts a higher priority on trying to exchange off the knights by playing knight to g4. And we've seen this idea before. Black's intention is to swing the knight across to e5 and exchange off a pair of knights, which would bring a black knight into an influential central position on e5, after which Black could hope to go for the c4 and d3 squares. It opens the diagonal for the bishop on g7 and makes Black's position easier to handle. Bishop f4. We mentioned the idea earlier of White having a problem with his bishop on c1, and in several games we saw the bishop come into g5. This time White puts the bishop on f4, with the hope, I think, and it's a long way off, of eventually getting round to play e4, e5. But as you can see here, with 3 black minor pieces and a pawn covering e5, it will be very, very difficult to actually effect that critical advance. Alright, Black played queen a5, bringing out the queen to a good square, preparing rook fb8. h3, knight comes into e5 as prescribed. White exchanges off the knight. Well, very difficult to see how he could have avoided that advance. I mean, he could leave the knight there, I suppose. Black would certainly take and bring his knight to e5. Again, knight d2, it should be pointed out, fails miserably to knight d3. And already the black knight has reached a very, very strong position, because, of course, knight c4 is answered by the crunching move knight takes b2, when White's position collapses like a house of cards. So all this helps to explain why Black took off the knight. Black recaptures with the knight. And now bishop takes e5. And this is a move you may criticise as an amateur's move, exchanging off a valuable bishop for the centralised knight, but I'm not sure that White can see what to do in this position. Now, going back to the position after knight takes e5, clearly queen e2 is a more important move here, and that was the move played in the game Karpov versus Salov, Belgrade 1996. So clearly this is a familiar position to Benko gambit fans. After that, and it is instructive to see how this game developed, rook fb8 was played, rook a c1, Karpov's trying to find the best way of consolidating the queen side. And now queen to a6. A textbook method, really, in this position, exchanging off the queens. And despite the fact in Karpov-Salov that, let's see how the game went on, the queens came off, and Black was playing an endgame of pawn down. He has enough pressure in this endgame to compensate him for the pawn. Not only that, but to maybe even give him slightly the better chances in this position. I'll just show you how that game went on, because it is pretty instructive, and it's a game at the highest level, so we can all learn from that. Black brings his rook into a good attacking position. Rook comes into b3. Knight d1. Well, bishop comes into d4, dominating the knight. Karpov brings his knight out. And now once again, and most instructively, Salov exchanges the pieces. And so what we've actually got here is a pure rook ending with Black a pawn down, but still with a pretty decent position, I think. And in fact, it's probably White who has to hold on here, actually, I would have thought. So let's just see how the game progressed. Rook b8, natural enough move. There's a nice square at b3 for the rook to occupy. a4 was played by Karpov. f6 by Black, freezing the white pawn chain in the centre. g4, time to bring the king in. a5, Karpov's using his pawn as a deflection in order to try and get his rook into a better position, as you will see. Rook a5, and now the move Karpov hopes will be the saving grace, b4. I mean, this is about the only move White can try in this position, the only move certainly which is going to keep him on the board. C takes b4, rook c6, b3 was played, rook b6, b2, rook takes b2, rook takes a6, and Karpov managed to hang on to make a draw. But as you can see, it's still Black for choice. So just going back to the game right Fedorowicz now, that's what might happen if White went queen e2. Basically, this is not a very promising line for White. Okay, well, White snapped off the knight on e5, and of course Black takes back with the bishop. And now rook to e3. A fairly clumsy looking move. But as I say, I think White is feeling a bit uncomfortable about the Black pressure in this position. But certainly the rook on e3 doesn't really have any function other than to protect the knight on c3. And really the rook on a dark square is uncomfortable for White. It's setting the rook up for some tricks later on. Okay, rook fb8. Easy enough move to understand. We've seen it plenty of times before. White defends his pawn with the queen. And now bishop d4. Again, exploiting the exposed position of the rook. And, well, maintaining Black's initiative. Rook f3. Is he hoping to start some sort of kingside attack? Or is that just a desperate measure? Rook to b7. By contrast, it's very easy to see what Black's doing, where Black's going. He intends to double the rooks on the b file, putting pressure on b2. a4. Watch out for the a pawn in Benko gambit positions. If White ever gets this pawn rolling, you might have a problem with Black. But here, a4 is just another weakening move as far as I can see, and certainly encourages Black to occupy the b4 square sooner rather than later, I would say. Well, I mean, Black could play rook ab8 in this position, but he preferred to play rook b4. Rook a2. Another very uncomfortable move, but perhaps that was the move that a4 prepared. Bishop e5. Note here that Black could regain his pawn with bishop takes c3, rook takes c3, rook takes a4, but prefers to retain the pressure. And this is a masterly decision. You can learn from this decision. It's almost always better to keep the pressure on in a game rather than to take back material if it means making the opponent's life easier. So I think that's why Fedorowicz preferred bishop e5. Just keep it. You can see he can take his pawn back whenever he likes. So he keeps the pressure on. Rook e3. White is marching to and fro without any clear way forward. Meanwhile, Black's plan improves, Black's position improves move by move. Knight d1. No other real way of nullifying the pressure on b2. But now again, Black is shunting his pieces into better positions. The rook comes to d4. An obvious improvement in position. Pawn up to b3, hoping to consolidate. Queen to b4. Not so easy to consolidate because White's pieces are all very, very passive. f4. A definite sign of impatience. What can I suggest as an improvement? Well, I mean, I guess a5 would be one improvement. Of course, after that, White has got to resign himself to the loss of the a pawn. I mean, I don't think there's any way that White is going to keep the a pawn in this position. For instance, Black can already start to gang up on it with rook a8. But the hope is that, you know, when Black takes the a pawn, he gives White perhaps a move or two to regroup, or perhaps to try and get his knight to c4, something like that. And then White can hope to hang on. But f4 is kind of, once again, a positional suicide. We've seen this before on the DVD. White gets frustrated. He makes a losing mistake. The trouble is, it's difficult for White to control the advance of his pawns. Those pawns kind of lurch forward without any support from the rear, and they just get picked off. So bishop g7, knight f2. Perhaps that was the idea. But the next move is very thematic and very, very strong. It's a move we can all learn from. Pawn to c4. And it's basically a move which brings all of Black's pieces into play, working together. The e4 pawn starts to look very sick. The a4 pawn starts to look a bit weak. And, well, White's queen's not on the ideal square either. OK, he's got to take that. Rook takes. Queen d3. Staying off the dark squares. But bishop d4. Very unpleasant move to have to meet. White retreats. Rook c3. And here the invasion of White's position begins. And it's going to hurt. White is in real trouble after rook c3. Queen d1 was played. A simple move. Bishop takes f2, forcing White to take with the king. Because, of course, if rook takes f2... Sorry, excuse me, wrong pawn. Queen takes e4, check. Sees the White position starting to disintegrate. So king takes f2, hoping to hold it all together. Queen c5, check. Now we can see the rook and queen working very nicely together. And penetration is not far away on the back rank. King g2, possibly the only move. Rook c1. Well, the g1 square is starting to look very, very appetising for the black queen. White went up to d3. Queen comes into g1, check. Up the board he comes. And now another very good move, pawn up to h5. Taking away escape squares from the white king. And just continuing to exert the pressure. h4. Well, if we just drop back, Black was already threatening stuff like queen h1 check. And then simply queen takes h3. When White is left with this naked king. So h4 was played. But now life after h4 can only be short. Queen f1 check. King e3 only move. Rook cb1, another beautiful move, threatening rook b3. Rook ac2, queen g1 check, and in this position White decided to call it a day. Well, basically, he's not long for this world. The king has nowhere to go. If he blocks, there are various simple wins, but perhaps queen takes g3 is the shortest and most brutal. So a very thematic game once again by Black, a very instructive game that we can all learn from, and a model demonstration of how to play Benko Gambit accepted positions.